Welcome to the Char Chit Chat, a podcast exploring all things biochar related, coming to you from a small sheep and tree farm in the deep south of New Zealand. Hi Amanda, Currie, thank you for joining me today.
Nice to speak with you, Dylan.
Thank you for your time. I would like to start by asking, where are you currently residing?
So we currently live in central Otago, and our farm, which is where we live, is located between Cromwell and Wanaka on the state highway. We're about 15 k's out of Cromwell.
Okay. And is it your farm or are you a manager on the farm?
So my husband and I own the farm, and we do have managers and staff as well. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. All right. And where do you say you are from and where did you grow up?
So I'm from Auckland and I grew up in the city. I trained as a chartered accountant. Then I went to the UK for 20 years. And in 2008, my husband and I decided to come to New Zealand to give our three sons perhaps a different type of experience. We have absolutely no farming background, but in 2012 we bought one. We had agri advisors telling us what to do because we don't know anything about farming, and we had farm manager on the site, and he is implementing the stocking policy. And about 6 years go by, and in 2018 we got a cattle disease called M. bovis, and at that moment I decided it would be a good idea to dig out our financial statements and just try and find out how we were actually going. So I did that, and I realized that every year we were just making losses. Some of these losses were pretty catastrophic. One year we made a profit. That was the year that we sold our capital stock, which is just a funny quirk of accounting that allows you to recognize profit. And it was all pretty disastrous. And my husband said, let's just sell it. Let's just sell it. It's a disaster. You just need to get out of it. And I felt quite defeated at the prospect of selling it. I realized that it wasn't going to be Hobbiton. That was my idea. I thought it was going to look like Hobbiton, and didn't look like Hobbiton. But I also recognized there were lots of challenges in agriculture. And so, I reckon if I had a good farm manager, which we did, we had a young guy, had not long been with us, I reckon I could farm it myself. I mean, how hard could it bloody well be? And so that was my kind of pathway into farming.
So up to that point, were you still doing accounting work? And was that kind of propping up the finances of the farm, outside jobs?
Yes, essentially was really just our outside jobs that carried that through. We had diversified a little, and we'd planted 20 hectares of Pinot Noir grapes, so a vineyard, and Central Otago Pinot is quite well regarded, and so we thought that was a good way of diversifying the business, but it still wasn't fixing up the overall picture. One of the things that concerned me was, and we're fully conventional, so we've got 750 hectares, we're applying fertilizer, we're growing winter crops including fodder beet, we're wintering all these animals, and those high input systems, unless you've got high revenues to match them, it's all very marginal. The market doesn't pay you 50 cents more than your cost of production. So you're very, very exposed to the risks of international markets, which in agriculture are quite centred on the New Zealand dollar, or the vagaries of what goes on with processors and when they've got oversupply and undersupply. So we were just bouncing around on those tides with absolutely no control over what was happening. And most of the time, we were losing.
All right. What age bracket do you fit into?
So I'm 62.
Okay. And what keeps you busy these days?
So if I back up the bus a little bit, in around the time that we got M. bovis, I'd already become a little bit disillusioned with this agricultural model. And there was something that really troubled me, which was this paradigm where you have to replace on the soil what you have removed. So you've got your crop, whether it's, in our case, it was livestock, they're grazing your grass. You remove the livestock because they go to be processed, and then you somehow have to replace what has been removed. And I just could not get my head around that. And that replacing meant that you were putting on a lot of product. And it didn't really matter if it was organic product or synthetic product. Just that idea struck me as quite problematic. And when we start to think about where the future ecology of the planet might go, if that was the way that it needed to be done, I just couldn't see anything happening that was good for the planet. I could just see further and further, slow, but degradation. So I started reading books, as you do. I went to a course run by Nicole Masters early in 2020, and I came across the work of the Soil Food Web School, as was then, now it's a foundation, in the US. And that was an organisation set up by Dr. Elaine Ingham, a soil microbiologist. And so in 2020, when COVID came around, they put all of their learning online because nobody was able to go to the US anymore. And so Jason Sutherland, who's our farm manager, and I, we decided we'll do this course. And it took us about a year. And there was a lot of learning involved. And it wasn't very easy because I had, last done biology when I was about 15, which was a long time ago. But we did it. And at the end of that program, you could then stay on and do further studies in microbiology, and in particular using microscopy for the assessment of microbiology. And so we decided that one of us was going to have to do that. And so anyway, I was the loser, so I did it. And from that, I went on and did further studies with them. And at the current moment, I'm still in a studying program where I am looking at methodologies for remediating soils using microbes.
All right. How have those studies translated to what you guys do on the farm?
So my main hypothesis is that if you've got degraded soils, which I have, can you use microbes to restore the soil ecosystem and get those soils to function naturally? So in order to do that, what we do is we breed microbes. So we breed these in a medium you would understand to be compost. We've designed a system where we are composting using only 4 ingredients. And these 4 ingredients come from our farm. So we chip crack willows. We have a lot of crack willows and we chip them. We use a green material. So for that, we'll mow our perennial pasture. So that's quite a diverse perennial pasture. Then we need a high nitrogen source. And so for that, we collect horse manure. So we need to have horses to support that system. That's why we've got these horses. That's what I tell my husband anyway. We add in leaves. Usually we add in a leaf mulch. And those are our 4 ingredients. What we do then is we make that compost using a thermophilic process. And so currently we make it in 10 cubic metre batches. So we make it with a small tractor. We make it in one big pile. We'll turn it. If we're lucky, we'll just turn it twice. Sometimes we have to turn it more. And then once it's finished, so it's reduced after about 30 days to an ambient temperature, we will decant it into the 1,000-litre shuttles that chemicals come in. We remove the plastic liner. We install some wire netting, which we cover with mesh, just shade cloth. And then we put our compost into that. We usually put some air in it as well, just using pipes, a bit like a Johnson Sue would. I don't think we need to do that, but I like to just preserve the idea of oxygen being able to remain in contact with the microbes. And then we fill that right up. So we get, roughly a cubic metre. So it's about a tonne, cover it with wool, irrigate it, leave it for about 3 months. We're testing it all the time, but at that point, we're comfortable with the fungal biomass in there. And then we take that compost product and we want to get the microbes off that particulate material. So we have modified a chaos sprayer by adding a stainless steel tea bag, if you like, to the top of it. So we'll put in 50 litres of compost and we blow them off with air into the tank. All that's left literally is the wood chip, which we just reuse. We're not actually looking for that wood chip to break down. We're actually just looking for that to provide a structure for the piles so that the aerobic microbes only are being grown or bred. And then we take that liquid solution, so we've got 1,000 litres in the chaos sprayer, and then we'll decant that into a 3,000 litre tow invert, and then we'll apply that to our soils. We've been doing that for a couple of years now, and what we've found is that using that process is helping to reintroduce microbes into the system. But if the soils are particularly degraded, we feel we might need something more. We only ever put them out in the rain because we're wanting the action of water and the force of gravity to pull those microbes into the soil profile. And we've been reasonably happy, but we don't think it's an end product. So what we're looking to do this season is to apply microbes in the process I've described, but with the addition of biochar. And for that to be done, we need to process the biochar into like a sand or a flour, if you like, so that it can go through our sprayer. And we're probably not looking to put it out at huge rates, but we're seeing what's the minimum that we could do to get a plant response. So I should have said that as well as applying it generally to some sites around the farm, we also have some sites that we've set up as control and test sites, which are really only on about a half a hectare site. And they're the ones that we monitor much more closely on a day-to-day basis to see what's the impact of what we're doing on the soil surface, or indeed at the root zone.
Yeah, nice. Okay. Yeah, I followed Elaine Ingham's work for many years, and yeah, I like what she was doing and has done. Was biochar even mentioned? Because I don't remember her mentioning it, but hopefully as things progressed, she had got into biochar. I'm not sure. Was it part of those studies?
No, so biochar isn't part of those studies, but in the program that I'm currently in, which is a sort of consultant program, we, in practical application, we are thinking much more closely about what needs to be done to facilitate microbes being introduced into your environment in a way so that they persist. So Elaine Ingham's work was very much about aerobic microbes being required. How can you breed them? How can you assess them? That kind of environment. Whereas, of course, in terms of out there in the field, it's all very well having your microbes and understanding how you breed them, but you've got a much bigger job of work when it comes to just actually getting them out into soils. If you're talking about a home garden or whatever, or even a smaller kind of version of a market garden, you could see how you could do that. But, I've got 750 hectares, so I need a model that's going to work for me. And one of the things I've noticed is in discussion with the mentors that I work with at the Soil Food Web Foundation, is that we do need to think about the roles of some of these other things that we can use, and biochar is one of those, alongside fungal and bacterial foods and all of those other things that you might need to do, for example, application of minerals, just to get your soils in balance and ensure that they're a home to receive the microbes that you're looking to apply.
Yeah. What is your annual rainfall?
We get about 500 mils.
Yeah.
We are really in a brittle environment. Not very many places in New Zealand are brittle, but we are. That is to say that the humidity down here is not evenly spread through the year. And if you visit Central Otago, your skin will get really dry. It's not at all humid. And that does probably impact how we need to manage our soils. Cover is probably quite important for us. Getting things to regenerate is more tricky.
Yeah. You're in that place in New Zealand where certain times of the year the evaporation is higher than your precipitation. So you're basically your bank account of water in your soil starts diminishing, and then
Yep.
your plants and stuff stop growing or have a harder time. Yeah.
Yeah, so we do get a summer dry, if you like, which can start as early as mid-December. It can go as late as end of March. And during that time, particularly if you've got wind events, your evapotranspiration is huge. It's not being replaced. So your soils are having to do a lot of work. So we're probably incentivized to try methodologies that reflect that situation and see whether we can't close that gap in terms of that dry period, which is really almost a mini non-growing season for us.
Yeah. All right. You said you're about to use biochar, but I think you have already made biochar in the past, haven't you? Tell us
Yeah,
about
so
your interest in biochar and your journey in discovering what it is and then getting a kiln made and everything like that.
Yeah, so when I first started going down this regen ag route, I was bombarded, with options and products and actions that people were taking. And I understood this biochar to be pure carbon. A lot of people were talking about it, applying it to the soil. And that puzzled me a little bit because I thought, well, if it's pure carbon and you apply it to the soil, that in and of itself isn't going to do anything. But I thought, well, best I get one of these kilns to find out. So I contacted an organisation in Europe and they sent me the plans for a Kontiki kiln and I had one of them made. And once we had it made, we made a batch of biochar and we looked at it and we weren't really sure what it was. And so we just left it in the bottom of the kiln and we didn't do anything else with it. I think it was about 2020. Recently, however, we started thinking about biochar being fed to cattle. A lot of people were talking about feeding biochar to cattle and as a sort of a supplement for them. Right? I couldn't really understand how that could work. I could understand how biochar might help animals to medicate themselves, because I know that in veterinary practice, sometimes sick animals will be fed a sort of version of biochar to soak up any parasites and toxins that might be inside them. So I thought that could be useful in that context. But we hadn't fed biochar to any of our animals, so I wasn't quite sure that we had a need to feed it to our animals. And the other thing I thought about was whether I could use the biochar, immerse it in my compost extract, and therefore, if you like, charge it or activate it and then put it out. So in relation to feeding it to animals, and I should perhaps explain that we apply the same thinking to our ruminants as we do to our soils. So we're thinking that what the animal's rumen needs is sugar, protein and fibre. And at certain times of the year, the rumen might not be getting enough sugar, and therefore the microbes are not breeding up because they need to breed up in the presence of sugar, and therefore the animals are not gaining weight as well as they might otherwise do. That might be particularly in winter when the feeds that we've got available don't have much sugar in them, if any. And just to explain that, on our farm, we do not feed our animals anything other than pasture, grass, or hay. They get no fermented product. We don't grow any winter crops. We believe that the animal's rumen is upset by the addition of fermented products or winter crops, and so we don't do them. We also don't drench our cattle ever, and we graze them adaptively around the farm. That is to say, a much more sophisticated method of grazing animals than rotational grazing, although we kind of recognise it, that we're moving them in mobs around the paddocks. When we're thinking about what they might need, we look at a soil test. So our soil tests across our farm will tell us we've got low levels of sodium, and we just make those minerals that are low in our soils available to them as free choice minerals. We don't use any attractant. We don't want animals to eat things just because they're attracted by them. We only want them to take them if they're medicating for a particular reason. And for example, our animals take huge amounts of salt because the sodium levels in our soils are so low. So I haven't used biochar, and I wasn't contemplating using it for our animals, although we do make it available, and from time to time some of them will take it, but there's no attractant in it. It's just the biochar, and we put it out as it comes out of the kiln, so in those pieces they're not really broken up, certainly not sort of pulverized or anything. And we don't charge it with anything because we don't want them to be, for example, attracted by molasses. So we don't want them to do that. We might want them to take molasses for other reasons, but if we did, we just make the molasses available by spraying it onto the pasture.
Yeah.
In terms of thinking about a home to put the biochar out with soil microbes, my biggest challenge is breaking the material up into this kind of sandy type consistency so that we can put it comfortably through our sprayer. Under a microscope, it's still going to look like big chunks, but obviously to us it kind of almost seems like a flower. And so the way I've been doing that for now, because I'm only looking at very small quantities, is to reuse yet another kitchen implement, which is what happens round in our lab from time to time. So I've used my NutriBullet, but eventually I'll have to find some kind of a bigger industrial type of machine to do that, if it works. So this summer we'll be looking to put a quantity of biochar out with soil microbes and see what happens.
My understanding is that with the tone fert, you can actually spray out quite large particles. I think you can get a nozzle that allows 50 mils.
Yeah, so we tend to use the biggest nozzle anyway, because we don't want the microbes to be smacked around too much. And even though the tone fert nozzles and the chaos sprayer nozzles are all designed not to have any of those sharp angles that would create a problem for microbes, nevertheless, we're sort of thinking we will have little bits of particulate material in there. We want them to go out without blocking up. So yeah, I think we could over time determine that we don't need as smaller particles we are currently producing. But in our test sites, which are about 8 metres by 50 metres, and we have 6 of those, we're wanting to really try to test quite carefully what is the size of particle, what is the rate of biochar application at that particle size, in combination with what rate of soil microbes is needed in order to generate a response. And we measure that response by looking at the soils under a microscope, or indeed measuring the above ground biomass that's grown as a consequence.
Hmm. Do you have any researchers involved, like anyone from a university?
After I completed my studies with the Soil Food Web, I realised I was going to need some actual help in order to deliver what I needed. At 62 years old, I do not think it's a good idea for me to be lugging around tons and tons of compost. So I have a soil scientist that works for me, and she's an ecology graduate from Lincoln. And together we work on the design of these experiments and their application. I think that in terms of biological farming, if I can describe myself that way, I think that what is being taught in universities is possibly a little behind where we are. But our hope is that Tegan will, who's my soil scientist, will go back next year and start her master's on what we are doing on our farm. And that will be a way of bringing together the academic kind of perspective with the field testing perspective, which is what we're doing. So we're very excited about that possibility, because if we can make this system work, we think that it holds great promise for the future of agriculture in a world where inputs are rising in cost all the time, and where there's also a demand for food with better nutritional value. And to us, that comes back to thinking about the soil. That's where it begins.
Yeah, that excites me as well, because we need research, whether it's privately funded or done in collaboration with the university. We need this research because the context is always important, and the easiest excuse for someone not to try something is to say, oh, my context is different. And your context is quite unique in terms of being in a brittle climate in New Zealand, but there's hundreds of thousands of acres in the same situation that would probably be quite applicable. And so we desperately need more case studies and more academic papers written on this kind of stuff. So hopefully you will get the master's student to do that work, which would be great. But even if you don't, you can release a lot of stuff yourself privately. I've done research on feeding biochar to the animals, and also done research on incorporating biochar into compost. The research was literature reviews, looking at what has already been done, and there were positive, really, really positive results for both, i.e., if you put biochar in your compost, it improves the whole composting process, and giving access to cattle to have the biochar in their diet really improves the efficiency of whatever they're consuming, whatever they're eating. I mean, it has those benefits of removing toxins and stuff, but there's quite a large step as well in just the efficiency of the feed, where the biochar is actually acting as a battery. And so when the microbes in the rumen are doing their work and breaking things down, they can use the biochar to borrow an electron, for example, or give an electron up in order to make that whole process more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
So that produces less methane and means that they're eating less volume of material. And so, they can put on a lot of weight and become healthy and stuff. And the farmers who are feeding biochar to their cattle seem to be quite unanimous on the animal health improving, the coats being really shiny, and animals getting less parasites, and generally not needing the drenching either. When you say you don't do any drenching, what do you do to ensure that they don't have the parasites? Is there a natural drench that you give them, or something in particular?
Initially, we played around with things like apple cider vinegar and putting that in troughs, and now we just don't do that. So always in a herd or a flock, you will get some animals that are clearly susceptible to parasites and others that are not. Some seem to do very well, others just completely collapse on you. So what we've done is just over the years, we just cull out any animals that don't seem to be thriving in our environment.
Yeah.
And that's just left us with animals that just don't need that drenching. Now, we tend to be a closed herd, so we're not trading animals. We're not bringing them in here.
Yeah, and you got the microscope skills as well, so that you can do the analysis of their manure and see
Yep.
what the parasites are and what the numbers are like. But yeah, I'm a great believer in breeding for the parasite resistance, and also that if they have all the minerals that they might need, that again, their nutrition should be able to support them to be healthy. And like you say, if they can't, then you cull them and you get very strong animals. I'm a firm believer in that, and I think that's definitely a positive in the future for all farming, is that we can always say, let's move towards that. Let's breed animals that are strong and healthy and don't need all these inputs.
Yes, I very much agree with that. And, if you think about the animal's rumen and you give it a drench, what the heck are you doing to all those microbes that were in that animal's rumen? Not just your pesky parasites. Yes, you've got rid of them, but you've probably got rid of everything else too.
Yeah. And I think that's also a positive thing. The more closed herds we have, the less disease spread there can be. All right, let's go a little bit more into the biochar. Please tell us about the process of getting the kiln made. Was that quite simple, or did you have to go to multiple different engineering companies to find someone who would be keen to have a go at making it, or was it really easy?
So for us, the process was quite simple to get the kiln made. I had the plans for the Kontiki Kiln. I took them to a local engineer and just told him to make it like that. We decided we'd have ours made with an adaptation at the bottom so we could put it onto the tractor forks, just in case we wanted to move it around. But it was quite straightforward. And then now it just sits outside in a paddock.
Yeah. And what's your main feedstock that you intend to use in it?
We've got quite a lot of crack willow here. We've got lots of crack willow. In fact, if there were any money in crack willow, I wouldn't actually have to be farming at all. But we tend to use the crack willow for our composting. We also have a lot of pine and that sort of tree, which we're constantly kind of trimming and that sort of thing. And that lends itself to using it as a feedstock. So that's what we do. So we don't pile it up and burn it. We put it to one side. We cut it down when we've got time. We dry it for about a year, and then we can make biochar with it. The smaller branches, we don't necessarily make biochar with those. We'll just chip those and use them for our landscaping. And so what we're doing is we're making biochar out of kind of logs of wood, not cut down to the size you'd use on your fire at home, but just maybe 75 centimetres to a metre type of length. We start the fire in the bottom and then we just build it up over however long it takes us until it's right at the top. And then when we can start to see that it is sort of breaking down into those little cubes, if you like, maybe 2 or 3 centimetres square, then we'll quench it by adding water from the bottom. By the time the thing is starting to float, it's all cooled down. We then drain the water out through the hole in the bottom and put it into fadges for storing it. So either a wool fadge or we store it in old seed bags, and then we just move it over to our shed and store it till we need it.
Yeah, nice. And how did you learn how to do this process?
We learnt how to do that process by just watching a few people doing it online.
Yes. Oh, I haven't asked you about your husband. How is he involved in the whole farm?
Oh, well, my husband is not involved in this farming enterprise at all. He doesn't like farms. He doesn't like animals. He definitely doesn't like horses. I've tried to get him to help me with the horses, but he doesn't.
Yeah. All right. Tell us a little bit about the winery side of things, because it sounds like you planted that in around 2016, was it? Something like that?
Yeah. Yeah. So we planted two vineyards, two 10-hectare vineyards, one in 2015 and one in 2017. Most of our grapes go to a wine company, but we do keep back a small quantity, about 5 tons or so, which is about the sort of smallest commercial quantity you can make wine from. And we have that made into a Pinot Noir for ourselves, and we sell that. And Adrian looks after that kind of process, and it's great. It's very nice to have something you can give people from your land. Our vineyard, so I should have explained that in order to really satisfy ourselves that what we're doing is actually improving things, we commissioned the Savory Institute to complete a ecological health audit of our landscape every year. And so they have about 16 sites across the farm that they monitor. And that gives us confidence that somebody external to us has had a look, measured it against some metrics, and actually is giving us a view about whether we're improving things or not. And we incorporated our vineyard into that a few years ago, and that's helped us. It focuses our attention on ecological health, and our vineyards are confirmed as regenerating, and our wine, therefore, is coming from land that's regenerating, and we think that's a great story to have.
Great. What's the quick summary of how you grow your grapes in a regenerative way?
So we pay a lot of attention to the soil and to cover. So we graze our sheep in our vineyards, not just in the winter. We'll graze them at different times during the growing season. The sheep do leaf plucking for us. We couple that with very minimalist chemical interventions. So we're only going to use chemistry if we absolutely have to. And we're going to pay very close attention to how vine health, what it's looking like when deciding whether we're going to do anything. So there's no blanket applications of stuff. We have one block, which is our trial block, where we're even trying to reduce our applications of sulfur, elemental sulfur, which is used in all vineyards across New Zealand, organic and conventional. And we're trying to reduce those applications because we regard that as a fungicide, and we don't really want to be applying any fungicide on our farm. So we're trying different ways of seeing whether we can introduce a diverse range of microbes as a method of protecting the vine from that fungal disease, powdery mildew, which has got everybody into spraying, elemental sulfur every 7 to 10 days in the growing season.
Yeah. So have you got any plans to incorporate biochar into your vineyard?
So what we've done this season, so where we've got problematic sections of the vineyard, what's great for vineyards, or what we conventionally look for, is gravelly soils. So those gravelly soils, however, have got not much clay in them. They've got lots of sand and silt. They don't hang on to things very well. Probably organic matter is very low. So where we get some information from the vineyard is when the machine harvester goes through, and most of our vineyard is machine harvested, we get an enormous amount of data about each individual vine. From that, we can see small sections of the vineyards that aren't doing very well. And what we tend to do is in the winter, we will go and apply a thick fadge of wool underneath those vines. That wool, so we're not using wool dags because that's going to introduce nitrogen toxicity. We're looking for the fleece wool. It'll break down very, very slowly. What it does is it insulates the soil from the heat and the cold. It helps with water infiltration, and it's slowly breaking down and releasing minerals and carbon to the soil over time. What we've done this winter, is to trial applying a wool biochar mix to see whether we get a better response to just plain wool. We know that we get an enormous plant response within one growing season to the application of that wool. Those vines, the coming season, will be much healthier. You can see it in them. The leaves are a deeper green, the trunks go thicker, the canes grow thicker. It will be very interesting to see whether adding biochar into that regime does anything.
Yeah. I mean, my one little concern about biochar is that it doesn't have a very quick response necessarily, that it might take several years, and that always makes it much more difficult to measure and quantify.
Yeah, I agree. I think what we did with that biochar into that application was we did apply it with a compost extract. So it had been, I think, charged is the word that people use, or activated. But it will be very interesting to see what it does. All of these kind of trials that we run, they have to be run over multiple growing seasons, because as you say, sometimes you apply microbes, the following season you notice absolutely nothing. A season later, that's when you notice something. So we're very careful about documenting what we've done and where for exactly that reason. Unlike synthetic products, where you do tend to get a response quickly, and that's probably one of the reasons people are so keen to use them, working with microbes and, as you say, biochar, I can see that might be a slower process.
Yeah. And it's so hard because it's such a complex system that the response you get 3 years later could have been just because you had the right rainfall at the right time. And yeah, it's so difficult. But anyhow, it's great that you are trying all these different things, because I'm sure that they make a difference. I'm really surprised that the wool makes a difference in just 1 year, because I thought the wool would break down much slower. But yeah, it's probably having such another moderating effect by changing the soil temperature and allowing the microbes underneath to really flourish.
Yeah, so what we find is the soil beneath vines that have had wool applied will have a bacterial biomass of about twice any other vine in the vineyard.
Yeah.
And I think that there is something about soil surface temperatures. So under a vineyard where you've got those spray zones, if you've got a spray zone, in our region, I would go out and measure the soil surface temperature 48 degrees in summer. Well, nothing's living there.
No.
So we're underneath the wool, or even, a mulch of another description, you'll see that soil surface temperature is about 20 degrees. So if you think about the growing season as being the time during the year when microbes are active, well, you've just extended your growing season by applying that wool. And there might be very many factors contributing to success. And we've got to recognize that. We are applying science in a field. So we're not applying it in a lab. We're not trying to understand the one variable. And we've got to recognize that in a growing environment, the reasons why things grow or don't grow is multifactorial, including rain. Just putting that out there. Rain, too much wind, all these factors can have an impact, which is part of the reason why longitudinal studies are just so important. The other thing that always gets me is I like to say that I tend to be very skeptical about most things, because what that enables me to do is to not have a pair of rose-tinted glasses on when I'm looking at the plant response. Whenever we do anything to the land that we believe is going to have a positive impact, we are ourselves inclined to see an impact regardless of whether it's there or not. So we do take photos, but I tend not to rely on photos. I'm much keener on looking at actual data points. Is there an actual data point I can see about this? Rather than just thinking everything looks good.
Yeah. Going back to the dung beetles, did you introduce those, or are they naturally in your area?
We don't have any dung beetles in our area. So about 2 years ago, I decided we're going to get these dung beetles. So we got them from Dung Beetle Innovations. I think we've got 4 different dung beetles that have been introduced in different, colony releases, depending on which sort of beetle they were. I was expecting, because I'd spoken to people who said that they had put these dung beetles out and sort of never seen them again. And I thought that could happen to us. So I sort of wasn't expecting to see any. But yes, we have seen them. Sometimes they'll just be, wandering around on the grass somewhere where we're wandering around. See them sometimes with the cattle, at different times of the year when they come up and they're flying around before they go back down again. I really believe dung beetles are a massive missing component of our ruminant farming systems. If we think about parts of the world where ruminants are endemic, there are also dung beetles there. So we introduced ruminants to New Zealand, but we did not bring the environment with them. And I think that's probably been a massive oversight, because as microbially active as my soils can be, is a big ask expecting that the soil biology by itself is going to get rid of all that cattle manure.
Yeah, it's huge volumes.
Huge. So I really feel dung beetles are very important. We've funded them ourselves. I'm very optimistic about seeing them persisting. So I think that's absolutely great.
Yeah. All right, I've got one more question about trees. What's your thoughts on trees and getting them involved in your journey and your systems?
One of my sort of starting points in terms of a philosophy around farming is that all irrigation probably is damaging to the land. So when I look at my farm, I've got 7 pivots. The only reason this farm is here is because of irrigation, because without irrigation, it would just be a massive dry land producing not very much. So I have an ambition, which I probably won't get to in my lifetime, which is that I remove a pivot. And just back up the bus a little bit. Obviously, to install a pivot, you take all the trees out. So now there's no trees. There's just soil. Put a pivot in, goes round and round and round. So what we've done for and we started with our worst performing area, so which is a pivot, which covers about 100 hectares. And we planted trees initially around the perimeter with a view to breaking the wind, because if we think about what's going on, it's actually often the wind which is the most drying climatic thing that you get, more so even than just the dry. So we planted trees around the perimeter, and then we thought, well, could we plant trees under the final span of the pivot? So if you imagine a pivot is made up of 55-meter sections going out, and each section has a little gearbox and on some tires, and that's what pushes it around the area of the circle. So we've taken the last span, so the last 55 meters, and we are planting exotic trees under that pivot span. And the reason why we're doing that is because we think if we can get those trees up, then we could remove that span. Yes, we would lose the ability to irrigate that 55-meter area around the pivot, which is about 20 hectares. But we would gain in terms of shade and also windbreak. And the benefits of the shade and the windbreak would help to compensate for the loss of artificial irrigation. And therefore, we'd still be able to graze ruminants under it. So we would in theory, not lose any production. Now, the reason why we've planted exotics is because we are interested primarily in trees that can be grazed by livestock and also that lose their leaves. And the reason why we want that is because I believe that leaves are a huge contributor to encouraging fungal biomass in your soil, and we want that leaf fall. So we began that program about 3 seasons ago. Obviously, we've had quite a lot of trial and error, and we're working our way around that pivot. We've done about 3/4 of it so far. So we'll have another couple of winters, I think, of planting those trees. We'll let them be irrigated by the pivot during the summer season, and then we'll take the span out. And by that stage, I think we'll have a pretty good idea about how the biomass is going to respond to that in terms of shade and protection from the wind.
Yeah. What's your main reason that you think irrigation is bad for the soil?
Just because we're inclined to over-irrigate.
Yeah.
And if you apply too much water, and it's very difficult not to because you've got it, so you might as well use it, right? Well, you're probably just encouraging a lot of things running away.
Yeah. So the main problem is that the over irrigation will leach out minerals and so on from the soil.
Yeah. Then your soils effectively almost become more degraded than they were before.
Yeah, it feeds into that moron philosophy that the big ag wants. They want everybody with high input systems, and the irrigation just contributes and supports that, really.
It does, just like certain kinds of grass seeds do, just like certain kinds of animals do, just like the drenches are all part of that story. They're all part of that system. And that's just a system which I just don't think can ever be truly sustainable. You can farm it to have a lower impact, but you can't farm it to have a positive impact.
And what's the energy cost of those pivots in terms of fossil fuels?
I mean, ours are all electric, and we do actually run them off solar now. So, but you can obviously run them on fossil fuels, and then they would be very expensive to run.
So the main fossil fuel input is in the actual making of the pivot itself and making the solar panels and
Yes,
wiring and all the
yes,
electronics.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So and they're also financially not costing you so much money. But I think, yeah, like you say, there could be a future time where you can remove them and still farm on that land because you replace them with the trees and have more of a silver pasture system.
Absolutely, definitely. And at the moment, we still graze around them because we don't fence them off in a tree lane kind of thing. We fence them with an individual tree guard, and we put stock in those. Tree guards are about 1.5 meters high, and they're really spiky. Stock don't go anywhere near them.
What do you think the landscape looked like before people came and cleared it for farming? Do you know?
As I understand it, around us at the top of the ranges would have been totara, and sort of down where we are, so we're not right at the top, would have been kowhais.
Okay. But I am guessing the climate would have been a lot moister then.
Well, you would imagine that if all these ranges were actually covered in trees, that the climate would have been very different. So in many ways, you're really up against it to get those trees to come back.
Yeah, yeah. But doing what you're doing and changing the way that you farm, even if you are going to use irrigation, I think is still definitely lots of steps in the right direction. So yeah, no, thanks for that. That's good. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about today?
So the only other thing I just wanted to mention, which I probably neglected to mention, is that we're currently running an experiment where we've taken a quantity of compost. It's a very young compost, so it's just finished the thermophilic stage, and it's now in its maturing phase. And we've added biochar to half of it and not to the other half. And the purpose of doing that is to test what happens to the microbial population of both of those samples. So we're keeping them hydrated at the same level, which for us usually is about 60% moisture. And then we're just going to see what happens. And the point about me talking about that is because I think that's the kind of experiment that people who are working on the land need the results of to understand why it is worthwhile doing and that it does actually produce an outcome that you can measure under a microscope. It might have another outcome, which is you put it on your land and your plants do better, but just to understand what is actually happening in that biomass.
Yeah. Are you able to break apart a particle of biochar and then have a look at the biology inside it?
Well, I will do that. Because I'm fascinated. I hear a lot that, let's say you put it out in a sort of raw form, and then nothing happens that you can see because the microbes leave the soil medium and go and populate and breed up inside the biochar. I thought, well, that's an interesting idea. That kind of makes a lot of sense. That would explain why it's slow. And even where people say they notice things going backwards, well, that would kind of explain that. But I think what we'd like to do is to really understand, is that what actually happens? What does that look like inside there? So, yeah.
I think it's a short-term thing because they could go inside to get away from a predator, for example. They could have their party and whatever way that they reproduce, but I don't think they're going to stay there long term because there's no food source.
This is exactly my point. I think that pure carbon is exactly that. It's not a food source. They don't eat pure carbon. They need sugar. If to get that process going, you need sugar. So I would have thought that it's actually more about a home for them to be in, which doesn't also have a food source, because that encourages them to go out and get a food source, but it helps them to persist in the soil. And so I suspect that if we were to find a soil that had very high levels of carbon and organic matter, that actually there'd be almost nothing that you could do to kill the microbes in that soil because they're very protected. I think that because we're blowing off all our microbes off the particulate material, we've got the humic acids, but we've not got anything else. So they're just going out. The humic acid probably lasts for a little while and then it doesn't. So I'm really keen to explore how potentially quite small amounts of biochar might have an impact.
Yeah, hopefully you'll find it's a massive impact. I believe it will be a noticeable difference. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Dylan.
Well, thanks very much for your time today,
Okay.
Amanda, and sharing your journey. It's been really great. Thank you.
Lovely to chat with you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.